The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored cardstock, with gold-embossed lettering that spelled out my son's betrayal in elegant script. Marcus and Vanessa request the honor of your presence. No mention that this was his second engagement party in 18 months. No acknowledgement that I'd only learned about this relationship through Facebook 3 weeks ago, when a neighbor tagged me in their announcement post with a crying emoji and the words, "I'm so sorry, Helen." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat at my kitchen table in Phoenix, holding that invitation like evidence of a crime I didn't know I'd been accused of. The postmark was from Denver, where Marcus had moved after graduating law school 2 years ago. He'd told me he needed space to build his career, to figure out who he was without his overbearing mother always checking in on him. Those were his exact words during our last real conversation, delivered through tears on my front porch the day he loaded his Honda Civic with everything that mattered to him and drove away. The coffee in my mug had gone cold while I stared at those gold letters. Marcus Ryan Chen-Morrison, my baby boy who used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms until he was 8 years old, was marrying a woman I'd never met. A woman who had somehow convinced my son that his mother didn't deserve a phone call, a visit, or even a text message to share the most important news of his life. I knew about Vanessa Blackwell from the internet stalking I'd done after seeing their engagement photos. 26 years old, marketing director at a tech startup, originally from Seattle. Her Instagram showed a carefully curated life of yoga poses on mountain peaks, expensive dinners at restaurants with names in languages I couldn't pronounce, and weekend trips to Aspen with friends who looked like they'd stepped out of fashion magazines. In every photo, she glowed with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if you belonged somewhere. The engagement pictures had been professionally shot in some trendy downtown Denver location I didn't recognize. Marcus wore a navy suit I'd never seen before and smiled in a way that looked almost foreign to me, like he was performing happiness rather than feeling it. Vanessa posed beside him in a flowing white dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months, her dark hair styled in loose waves that caught the golden hour light perfectly. What struck me most wasn't how beautiful they looked together, but how Marcus seemed smaller somehow. In all the photos, she was positioned slightly in front of him, her hand on his chest in a gesture that looked possessive rather than affectionate. Even when he was looking at the camera, she was looking at him, like she was monitoring his performance, making sure he hit his marks. I'd called him immediately after seeing the photos, my hands shaking as I dialed the number I'd memorized since he was old enough to have a phone. It went straight to voicemail. The generic automated message that meant he'd either blocked my number or changed it without telling me. I tried texting. The messages showed as delivered but never read. For 2 weeks I'd been reaching out to anyone who might have Marcus's current contact information. His college roommate, his former girlfriend Emma, who I'd always liked, even his father Richard, who I'd divorced when Marcus was 12 but who usually maintained some relationship with our son. Everyone gave me the same response. Marcus had asked them not to share his information with me. He needed space, he was working through some things. They were sorry, but they had to respect his wishes. The invitation felt like a slap delivered by the postal service. Formal, distant, and arriving exactly 37 days before the wedding. Just enough time to RSVP and arrange travel, but not enough time to rebuild a relationship that had apparently been severed without my knowledge or understanding. I'd raised Marcus alone for most of his life after Richard decided that being a father was too much responsibility for a man who'd rather spend his weekends playing golf and his evenings at sports bars with his single friends. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after the divorce, managing the day shift at an insurance company and waiting tables 3 nights a week at a family restaurant downtown. Marcus used to do his homework at table 12 while I served customers, the manager's soft spot for a quiet kid with good grades, earning us free meals and a safe place for him to wait until my shift ended. We'd been a team. When he got into Stanford on a partial scholarship, I'd sold my car and taken out a loan against the house to help cover what financial aid didn't. When he struggled with organic chemistry his sophomore year, I'd driven 12 hours to Palo Alto to bring him homemade soup and sit with him while he studied. When he got accepted to law school at University of Colorado, I'd cried with pride and helped him research apartments in Boulder, spending hours on Zillow looking at places I'd never be able to afford, but that seemed worthy of my brilliant son. Somewhere between his law school graduation and this invitation, I'd lost him. Not to distance or natural growing up, but to something deliberate and calculated. The kind of loss that felt like theft. I called my sister Patricia in Tucson, needing to hear a voice that would validate my confusion instead of making excuses for it. She answered on the second ring, already knowing why I was calling because I'd texted her a photo of the invitation the moment I'd opened it. 37 days notice for her own son's wedding, Patricia said without preamble. That's not an invitation, Helen, that's a notification. Maybe he's been trying to work up the courage to call me directly, I said, though I didn't believe it. Maybe Vanessa convinced him to send the invitation as a way of breaking the ice. Or maybe she's been working very hard to make sure you're not part of his life, and this is her way of covering her tracks. Send the invitation so nobody can say she kept the groom's mother away, but send it too late for you to actually be involved in planning or preparation. Patricia had a way of cutting through my desperate optimism with surgical precision. She'd been the one to tell me that Richard was probably having an affair 6 months before I found the receipts for hotel rooms and jewelry I'd never received. She'd been the one to suggest that Marcus's sudden coldness after law school might not be about stress or career pressure, but about someone new in his life who didn't want to share his attention. I have to go, I said. I have to try to fix this before it's too late. Helen, honey, you can't fix something when you don't know what's broken. And you can't fight an enemy you've never met. But I was already looking up flights to Denver on my laptop, my credit card lying on the table next to the invitation. I found a round-trip ticket for the following weekend that cost more than I usually spent in a month, but Marcus was worth it. He'd always been worth everything. The flight to Denver gave me 2 hours to rehearse what I'd say when I surprised him at his apartment. I'd practiced the conversation so many times that I could recite it like a speech. Casual but not desperate, concerned but not accusatory, loving but not clingy. I would ask about his job, his life, his happiness. I would tell him how proud I was of everything he'd accomplished. I would ask to meet Vanessa and offer to help with wedding planning. I would be the mother he remembered instead of whatever version Vanessa had apparently convinced him I'd become. Marcus lived in a trendy neighborhood called Reno, according to the address I'd found by calling his law firm and pretending to be updating emergency contact information. The Uber driver pointed out converted warehouses and artisanal coffee shops as we drove through streets lined with murals and young professionals walking dogs that cost more than most people's rent. His building was one of those modern glass and steel constructions that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about urban living. The kind of place that charged extra for amenities like a rooftop deck and a fitness center, where residents paid premium prices to live surrounded by other people who could afford to pay premium prices. I stood outside the entrance for 10 minutes, watching people badge in and out through the security doors, building up courage to press the buzzer for apartment 4B. A young woman with Vanessa's Instagram hair color walked past me toward the building, and my heart stopped for a moment before I realized she was at least 6 inches shorter and had completely different features. The paranoia was making me see threats everywhere. When I finally pressed the buzzer, Marcus's voice came through the intercom sounding tinny and distant. "Yeah, Marcus, it's Mom." The silence stretched so long I thought the system had disconnected. "Then Mom, what are you doing here?" "I was hoping we could talk. I know it's been too long, and I miss you." Another pause. "This isn't a good time. I flew in from Phoenix. I'm only here for the weekend." I tried to keep the desperation out of my voice, but it leaked through anyway. "Just coffee, just an hour." "Hold on." The intercom went quiet. I waited, watching my reflection in the glass doors, seeing a 52-year-old woman who looked older than her years, wearing her best jeans and the blue sweater Marcus had always said brought out my eyes. I dressed carefully for this reunion, wanting to look like the mother he'd loved rather than the one he'd apparently decided to discard. The intercom crackled back to life. "Come up to 4. The elevator ride felt like ascending to a job interview where the position was mother and I was competing against an unknown candidate who'd apparently been doing the job better than I had. The hallway was carpeted in something soft and expensive that muffled my footsteps as I walked to 4B. Marcus opened the door before I could knock, and the sight of him hit me like a physical blow. He'd lost weight since I'd seen him last, and his hair was shorter, styled in a way that made him look more serious, more adult, more like a stranger. But his eyes were the same brown I'd been looking into since the day he was born, and for a moment I saw my little boy hiding behind the careful expression of this man I barely recognized. "Hi, Mom." He didn't move to hug me, didn't invite me in. Just stood in the doorway like a bouncer at a club I wasn't dressed appropriately to enter. "You look good," I said, though he looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide, and his smile seemed practiced rather than genuine. "Can I come in? I'd love to see your place." He glanced over his shoulder into the apartment, and I caught a glimpse of modern furniture and windows that faced the downtown skyline. "Actually, would you mind if we went somewhere else? There's a coffee shop around the corner that's pretty good." The rejection stung, but I nodded. "Of course, whatever you're comfortable with." We walked to the coffee shop in silence, broken only by small talk about the weather and my flight. Marcus ordered a complicated drink with multiple modifications while I asked for black coffee, and we found a table by the window where we could watch pedestrians hurry past on the sidewalk outside. "So," I said, wrapping my hands around my mug for warmth and courage. "Congratulations on your engagement. I'm so happy for you." Marcus's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thanks. I meant to call you earlier, but things have been crazy with work and wedding planning." "Tell me about her." "Vanessa. She looks beautiful in the photos." "She is." Marcus's voice carried a warning I couldn't decode. "She's amazing, really successful, really driven. She's taught me a lot about setting boundaries and focusing on what's important." The words felt rehearsed, like he was reciting talking points from a conversation he'd had with someone else. "I'd love to meet her. Maybe the three of us could have dinner tonight?" "She's out of town this weekend. Work conference in San Francisco." Marcus stirred his drink with unnecessary intensity. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My stomach dropped. "Of course, anything. Why didn't you ever tell me about the letters?" "What letters?" "The letters you sent to Emma's family. To my roommate's parents. To people I cared about, telling them things about me that weren't true." I stared at him, completely lost. "Marcus, I have no idea what you're talking about. I never sent letters to anyone about you. Don't lie to me." His voice carried a hurt so deep it made my chest ache. "I've seen them. Vanessa showed me copies. You wrote to Emma's mother after we broke up, telling her that I'd been abusive, that I had anger issues, that Emma was lucky to get away from me." The accusation hit me like ice water. "That's absolutely not true. I never wrote any such thing. I liked Emma. I was sad when you two broke up, but I never interfered." "And the letter to Professor Williams, telling him I'd been cheating in his class." "Marcus, I don't even know who Professor Williams is." "My constitutional law professor."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"The one who almost failed me because of what you told him." I reached across the table to touch his hand, but he pulled away. "Sweetheart, I promise you on everything I hold sacred, I never wrote any letters like that. I would never try to hurt your relationships or your education. You're my son. I love you." Marcus studied my face with the analytical intensity he'd developed in law school, looking for evidence of deception. "Vanessa said you'd deny it. She said people who do things like this never take responsibility. Where are these letters? Can I see them?" "Vanessa has them. She's been collecting evidence for months, trying to understand why all these people had such negative things to say about our family." Something cold and calculating was taking shape in my mind, but I pushed it away. Surely no one would be cruel enough to fabricate evidence against a mother they'd never met. "Marcus, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, or maybe someone else sent those letters pretending to be me. Who would do that? I don't know, but I swear to you, it wasn't me." Marcus finished his coffee and checked his phone. "I should get back. Vanessa's calling tonight and I promised I'd be available. Will you at least consider the possibility that those letters didn't come from me? Will you ask Vanessa to show you the originals? Or maybe let me see them so we can figure out what's really going on." "I'll think about it." But his tone suggested he wouldn't. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It was good to see you." He stood up and I realized our reunion was over. 30 minutes of stilted conversation and I was being dismissed again, sent back to Phoenix with more questions than answers and a broken heart that seemed to crack a little more with each interaction. Marcus, wait. I stood up too, not caring that other customers were starting to stare. I know we haven't been close lately, and I know I probably made mistakes when you were growing up, but I need you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Whatever's happened between us, whatever someone has told you about me, I want to fix it. I want us to be a family again. For just a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw the confusion and pain underneath. I want that too, Mom, but I can't keep pretending that things that happened didn't happen. I can't keep making excuses for behavior that hurt people I care about. Then help me understand what I supposedly did, so I can make it right. I'll call you next week, he said, but we both knew he wouldn't. I watched him walk away down the sidewalk, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders set in a way that suggested he was carrying weight. I couldn't see. My son, my baby, my best accomplishment, had become a stranger who believed I was capable of sabotaging his life. The flight back to Phoenix gave me 2 hours to replay every moment of our conversation, looking for clues I'd missed. The way he'd glanced over his shoulder before leaving his apartment, like he was checking to make sure someone wasn't listening. The practiced quality of his accusations, like he'd rehearsed them. The fact that he couldn't show me the letters himself, that all evidence of my supposed crimes was controlled by a woman I'd never met. Patricia picked me up at the airport, one look at my face telling her everything she needed to know about how the reunion had gone. What did she do to him? She asked as we drove through the desert toward my house. I don't know yet, but whatever it was careful and it was thorough. Are you going to fight back? I thought about Marcus's face when he'd accused me of writing letters I'd never sent, the hurt and disappointment in his eyes when he looked at a mother he no longer recognized. I don't know how to fight an enemy who's convinced my own son that I'm the villain. Then you better figure it out fast, because in 35 days she's going to marry him and you're going to lose him forever. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by photo albums, looking at pictures of Marcus from birth to law school graduation. The chubby-cheeked toddler who'd insisted on wearing his Superman cape to the grocery store. The gap-toothed kindergartner who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings of us holding hands under a rainbow. The high school graduate who'd thanked me in his valedictorian speech for showing him that love meant working 3 jobs to keep food on the table and dreams alive. Somewhere in this progression from boy to man, someone had inserted poison into his memories of me. Someone had rewritten our history, painting me as manipulative and destructive instead of devoted and sacrificial. Someone had stolen my son by convincing him that his mother was the enemy. I picked up my laptop and started researching Vanessa Blackwell with the intensity of a private investigator. Her LinkedIn profile showed a career trajectory that seemed almost too perfect. Prestigious university, internships at major corporations, rapid promotions at startups that were flush with venture capital. Her social media presence was equally polished, inspirational quotes about female empowerment, photos from charity galas, and professional networking events, carefully curated glimpses of a life that looked like an Instagram advertisement for success. But the more I dug, the more something felt off. Her work history had gaps that weren't explained. Her college sorority sisters never appeared in any of her photos despite her frequent posts about the importance of female friendship. Her family was notably absent from her social media despite her posts about the value of close relationships and authentic connections. I found a wedding announcement from 3 years ago in a Seattle newspaper. Vanessa Blackwell marries Thomas Chen, both graduates of University of Washington. The photo showed a younger Vanessa in an elaborate white dress, standing next to a man who looked nothing like Marcus, but whose last name was identical to my son's middle name. Vanessa had been married before, recently enough that her previous husband's name was still appearing in public records, recently enough that her marriage to Marcus would be bigamy if she hadn't gotten divorced first. I spent the next 3 hours searching divorce records in Washington state, finding nothing. No dissolution of marriage, no legal separation, no annulment. As far as the state of Washington was concerned, Vanessa Blackwell was still married to Thomas Chen, which meant her engagement to my son was built on a lie that could destroy his legal career if anyone discovered it. Which meant I finally had something to fight back with. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting against. I called in sick to work the next morning and drove to the Phoenix Public Library, where I used their computers to dig deeper into Vanessa's digital footprint. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who remembered me from Marcus's childhood reading programs, helped me navigate databases I'd never heard of and search engines that revealed more than I'd thought possible. What I found was a pattern. Vanessa had a history of inserting herself into the lives of successful men, isolating them from their families and friends, and then extracting maximum benefit before moving on to the next target. Her first victim had been a tech entrepreneur in Seattle, whose startup had gone public right around the time Vanessa became his girlfriend. His mother had tried to warn him about Vanessa's manipulation, had documented instances of Vanessa intercepting family communications and manufacturing conflicts between mother and son. The entrepreneur's mother had started a blog about parental alienation after losing her son to what she called romantic terrorism. She'd written extensively about the tactics used by manipulative partners to control their victims through isolation and emotional manipulation. The blog had only 12 followers, but every post felt like someone describing my exact situation with eerie precision. Vanessa's pattern was sophisticated and consistent. She targeted men with close family relationships, particularly those with strong maternal bonds. She would spend months studying their family dynamics, learning the pressure points and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Then she would begin manufacturing evidence of family dysfunction, creating conflicts that seemed to come from the victim's loved ones but were actually orchestrated by her. The letters Marcus had mentioned were probably just the beginning. If Vanessa was following her established pattern, she'd been slowly poisoning his perception of me for months, maybe since the beginning of their relationship. Every phone call I'd made that had gone unanswered, every text message that had been ignored, every attempt at connection that had been rebuffed, all of it was probably the result of Vanessa's interference. But knowing what she was doing wasn't the same as being able to prove it. And even if I could prove it, would Marcus believe me, or would he see my evidence as more manipulation from the mother who had allegedly been lying to him for years? I printed out everything I'd found and drove home to organize it into a timeline. Vanessa and Marcus had started dating 18 months ago, right around the time his communication with me had begun to change. Their engagement had been announced 6 months later, with no involvement from either family. The wedding was planned for 34 days from now, with minimal guest lists and maximum control over every detail. She was moving fast, trying to lock him in before anyone could interfere with her plans. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd invited me to the wedding. Maybe as a power play, maybe as a way to maintain plausible deniability about keeping me away. But she'd given me an opening, a chance to be in the same room as my son, for long enough to show him the truth. I started planning my own campaign, one that would expose Vanessa's lies without making me look like the manipulative mother she'd convinced Marcus I was. It would require patience, strategy, and probably a little bit of luck. But Marcus was worth the fight. He'd always been worth everything. The key was finding an ally, someone close to the situation who could help me reach Marcus without triggering his defenses. I needed someone who had access to information Vanessa couldn't control, someone who might have noticed discrepancies in her stories or behavior. I started making a list of everyone who would be at the wedding, everyone who might have insights into Marcus and Vanessa's relationship. His college friends, his co-workers, maybe even Vanessa's family, if I could figure out who they were and why they seemed to be absent from her public life. But as I sat at my kitchen table making lists and drawing connections, I realized I was missing the most obvious ally of all. Marcus might be isolated from me, but he wasn't completely alone. Somewhere in his life, there had to be someone who remembered the man I'd raised, someone who could see through Vanessa's manipulation to the truth underneath. I just had to find them before it was too late. The wedding was 33 days away, and I was just getting started. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 3 weeks before the wedding. I was sitting in my backyard, watering the tomato plants I'd grown from seeds. Marcus had given me 2 Christmases ago, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Denver, and my heart jumped thinking it might be Marcus finally ready to talk. Instead, a young voice I'd never heard before said, "Is this Helen Morrison?" Marcus's mom. Yes, who is this? My name is Lily Chen. I'm Marcus's stepdaughter. Well, I guess I will be after the wedding. Can we talk? Stepdaughter. The word hit me like cold water. Marcus was marrying someone with a child, and I'd known nothing about it. Another piece of his life that had been hidden from me. Another relationship I'd been excluded from understanding. Of course we can talk. Are you calling from Denver? Yeah, I'm at school. I'm 16, and I go to East High here. Look, Mrs. Morrison, I think you should know some things about what's been happening. Things that Marcus doesn't know about my mom. The way she said my mom carried weight, like she was carrying secrets that had become too heavy for a teenager to bear alone. What kind of things, sweetheart? Can we meet somewhere? I don't want to talk about this over the phone. My mom checks my phone sometimes, and if she found out I was calling you, she'd probably send me back to live with my dad in Seattle. We arranged to meet the next day at a Starbucks near her school. I booked another last-minute flight to Denver, this time with a sense of purpose instead of desperation. Someone close to the situation wanted to talk to me, someone who apparently had information that could change everything. Lily Chen was nothing like what I'd expected from Vanessa's social media presence. She was small for 16, with dark hair that hung in her face like a curtain she could hide behind when the world became too much. She wore an oversized hoodie and jeans, with holes in the knees, and she looked around the coffee shop nervously before approaching my table. Mrs. Morrison, her voice was barely above a whisper, call me Helen please, and thank you for reaching out to me. That took courage. She slid into the chair across from me and immediately wrapped her hands around the hot chocolate I'd ordered for her. I wasn't sure if I should call you or not. But Marcus is really nice to me, and I can see how sad he gets sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking. And I know my mom's been lying to him about a lot of stuff. What kind of lies? Lily took a shaky breath. First, you should know that my mom's still married to my dad. They never got divorced. She just left one day and told me we were moving to Denver for her new job, but really it was because she'd met Marcus online and wanted to get closer to him. The bigamy confirmation hit me hard even though I'd suspected it. Does Marcus know? No. She told him that my dad was abusive and that they'd gotten divorced, but she didn't want to talk about it because it was too traumatic. She even showed him fake divorce papers she made on her computer. I pulled out my phone and started recording. With Lily's permission, if this 16-year-old was brave enough to expose her mother's lies, the least I could do was make sure her words were preserved accurately. What else has she been lying about? The letters. The ones she told Marcus you sent to his friends and professors. She wrote those herself. I watched her do it. She would research people Marcus cared about, and then write these horrible letters pretending to be you, saying terrible things about him. My hands started shaking. Do you have any proof of this? She keeps drafts of all the letters on her laptop. She's really paranoid about deleting things because she says you never know when you might need evidence. I can show you where she hides the files. Why would she do something so cruel? Lily stared into her hot chocolate. Because she wanted Marcus all to herself. She said that men with close families are harder to control, so she had to break those connections first. She's done this before. With your father, and the guy before him. My mom targets successful men who have good relationships with their families. She studies them for months before making her move, learning everything about their lives and the people they love. Then she slowly destroys those relationships while positioning herself as the only person who really understands them. The sophistication of Vanessa's manipulation was staggering. This wasn't emotional abuse born of passion or jealousy. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to isolate and control her victims. Lily, why are you telling me this? Aren't you afraid of what your mother will do if she finds out? I'm already afraid of her every day. She's not a good person, Mrs. Morrison. Helen, and Marcus deserves better than what she's doing to him. He talks about you sometimes when she's not around. He tells me stories about when he was little, about how you worked multiple jobs to take care of him, about how proud you were when he got into law school. He misses you, but she's convinced him that you're dangerous. What exactly has she told him about me? That you're mentally unstable, that you've been stalking his ex-girlfriends and trying to sabotage his relationships for years. That you sent those letters because you couldn't stand the idea of him being happy with someone else. She even faked text messages from you, threatening to hurt yourself if he didn't come home to Phoenix. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just stolen my son, she'd turned me into a monster in his mind. Every loving gesture I'd ever made had been reframed as manipulation. Every expression of concern had been twisted into evidence of my instability. She's planning to move him to Europe after the wedding, Lily continued. She says it's for a job opportunity, but really it's to get him as far away from you as possible. She's already been applying for jobs in London and Berlin, places where it would be almost impossible for you to visit. Does Marcus know about the Europe plan? She's going to spring it on him after they're married. She says that by then, he'll be so committed to their new life together that he won't want to risk losing her by refusing to go. I thought about my gentle family-oriented son, being systematically isolated from everyone who'd ever loved him, moved to a foreign country where Vanessa would be his only connection to anything familiar. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Lily, I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to help me expose what your mother has been doing? It would mean showing Marcus the evidence, probably confronting your mother directly. It could get very ugly. She nodded without hesitation. I've been waiting for someone to ask. I can't watch her destroy another person like she destroyed my dad, and I can't watch Marcus marry her knowing what I know. What happened to your father? She did the same thing to him, isolated him from his family, convinced him that everyone who tried to warn him about her was just jealous, or trying to sabotage his happiness. By the time he realized what was happening, she'd already moved on to her next target. He's been trying to get custody of me for 2 years, but she keeps moving us around and using legal technicalities to prevent him from finding us. The pattern was becoming clearer. Vanessa wasn't just a manipulative girlfriend. She was a predator who moved from victim to victim, extracting what she needed before disappearing, and starting the cycle again. Marcus was probably already being evaluated for his exit potential, while she secured her next target. What kind of evidence can you access? Everything. She keeps detailed files on all her targets. Photos, financial information, family histories, psychological profiles. She has a whole folder on you with information going back years. She knows about your job, your mortgage, your sister Patricia, even your medical records from when you had your gallbladder surgery last year. The violation was overwhelming. This woman had been stalking my life, gathering ammunition to use against me in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. How did she get my medical records? She has contacts at data broker companies, people who sell personal information to anyone willing to pay for it. She says it's a business expense, because understanding your targets completely is the key to controlling them effectively. Lily, this isn't just manipulation, this is identity theft, fraud, maybe even criminal stalking. Your mother could go to prison for some of this. Good, maybe then my dad can finally get custody, and I can have a normal life. We spent the next 2 hours planning our strategy. Lily would copy the files from Vanessa's laptop and send them to me through an encrypted email account. I would compile everything into a comprehensive report that would show Marcus the truth about what had been happening to him. Then together, we would confront Vanessa at the wedding, in front of all the guests she'd been performing for. There's something else you should know, Lily said, as we prepared to leave. She's been cheating on Marcus almost since they started dating. She has 2 other guys she's been seeing, both of them potential next targets. One of them is going to be at the wedding. Who? His name is David Rodriguez. He's a venture capitalist from San Francisco, who she met at a conference 6 months ago. She told Marcus he was just a professional contact, but I've seen the text messages. She's been promising both of them that she's going to leave Marcus after the wedding, because she's realized he's not ambitious enough for her. The final piece of Vanessa's cruelty clicked into place. She wasn't even planning to stay married to Marcus. She was using the wedding as a way to extract maximum financial benefit while simultaneously positioning herself for her next relationship. Marcus was going to be discarded as soon as she'd taken everything of value from him. Does she know that you know about David? She thinks I'm just a dumb kid who doesn't pay attention to adult conversations. She talks on the phone with him when she thinks I'm sleeping or doing homework. She's been planning to introduce him to Marcus at the wedding as her business partner, then use that connection to transition into her next relationship after she's finished destroying Marcus. I flew back to Phoenix that night with a memory card full of evidence and a 16-year-old girl's courage, inspiring me to fight harder than I'd ever fought for anything. Lily had risked everything to give me the weapons I needed to save my son. Now I had to figure out how to use them without destroying what was left of my relationship with Marcus in the process. The evidence Lily had copied was even more damaging than I'd expected. Vanessa had been documenting her manipulation tactics, like a researcher conducting an experiment. She had spreadsheets tracking Marcus's emotional responses to various triggers, detailed analyses of his psychological vulnerabilities, and step-by-step plans for isolating him from everyone who might interfere with her control. The fake letters she'd written in my name were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. She'd studied my writing style from old emails and social media posts, then crafted messages that sounded like they could have come from me but were designed to make me look unstable and vindictive. She'd even researched my personal history to include details that only someone close to me would know, making the letters more believable to their recipients. But the most damaging evidence was her communications with David Rodriguez and another man named Kevin Walsh, both of whom she was cultivating as backup plans. Her text messages revealed the calculating coldness behind her romantic persona. She discussed Marcus like he was a financial investment that was about to mature, talked about their upcoming marriage as a liquidation event that would set her up for her next phase of operations. In one particularly chilling exchange with David, she'd written the wedding is just theater at this point. Marcus serves his purpose for now, but he's not sophisticated enough for long-term potential. You and I both know that real success requires more vision than he'll ever have. David had responded, I still don't understand why you're going through with marrying him if you're planning to leave. Vanessa's reply, because divorce settlements are much more favorable than breakup negotiations. And because I need to establish a track record of successful relationships for future targets. Men like you want to believe they're stealing someone away from someone else. It makes them feel more powerful. I printed everything and organized it into a presentation that would be impossible for Marcus to dismiss or explain away, but I knew that simply confronting him with evidence might not be enough. Vanessa had spent 18 months conditioning him to distrust anything negative about her, especially anything that came from me. I needed a strategy that would allow him to discover the truth himself, in a way that couldn't be dismissed as his crazy mother's desperate attempt to sabotage his happiness. The solution came from an unexpected source. Patricia had been helping me research legal options for exposing Vanessa's fraud when she discovered that David Rodriguez had been featured in a Denver Business Journal article about venture capital trends. The article included a photo of him at a networking event, and in the background of that photo was Vanessa, clearly identifiable and obviously comfortable in David's company. The article was dated 3 weeks before Marcus and Vanessa's engagement announcement. This is it, Patricia said, pointing at the photo on her laptop screen. This proves she was already involved with David before she got engaged to Marcus. And it's from a public source that Marcus can verify independently. I called the Business Journal and spoke to the photographer who had taken the picture. He remembered the event clearly because Vanessa had approached him afterward asking for copies of photos that included her and David. He'd thought it was odd because she'd introduced herself as David's business partner, but their body language in the photos suggested a much more intimate relationship. The photographer still had the original high-resolution images, including several that showed Vanessa and David holding hands and whispering to each other like lovers. He agreed to provide copies for a small fee, especially when I explained that they might be needed for legal proceedings. Now I had proof of Vanessa's infidelity that came from a neutral third party, and could be independently verified. Combined with Lily's evidence about the fake letters and the bigamy, it would be impossible for Marcus to dismiss everything as coincidence or manipulation. The wedding was 8 days away, and I was ready to save my son. I called Marcus's law firm and asked to speak to him directly, telling his assistant that it was a family emergency. When he came on the line, his voice was cautious but not hostile. Mom, is everything okay? Marcus, I need to see you before the wedding. There are some things about Vanessa that you need to know, things that affect your safety and your career. We've been through this. I'm not going to listen to you badmouth my fiancé. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. I have documentation from independent sources that proves Vanessa has been lying to you about fundamental aspects of her life. Legal documents, public records, evidence that could put your law license at risk if you don't address it before the wedding. The mention of his law license got his attention. Marcus had worked too hard to get where he was to risk his career on someone else's deception. What kind of legal issues? Bigamy, fraud, identity theft. Marcus, she's still married to someone else. The divorce papers she showed you are fake. If you marry her on Saturday, you'll be committing a crime. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then can you prove that? Yes, and I can prove a lot of other things too. Will you meet with me? Will you look at the evidence before you make a decision that could destroy your life? Send me what you have. Email it to me at work. I'd rather show you in person. Some of this is sensitive and I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what's been happening. Another pause. Fine, but not here in Denver. Can you meet me halfway? Maybe in Colorado Springs. There's a hotel there with a conference room we could use. We arranged to meet 2 days before the wedding at a Hampton Inn conference room in Colorado Springs. I would bring all the evidence and Marcus would bring an open mind. It wasn't the reunion I dreamed of, but it was a chance to save him from a marriage that would destroy everything he'd worked for. The drive to Colorado Springs gave me 4 hours to rehearse what I would say and how I would present the evidence. I'd organized everything chronologically, starting with the proof of Vanessa's existing marriage and building up to the fake letters and the affair with David Rodriguez. I would let the facts speak for themselves and try to remain calm and objective, even when discussing the woman who had stolen my son and tried to destroy my reputation. Marcus was already waiting in the conference room when I arrived. He looked tired and stressed, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. When he saw me, he stood up and hesitated for a moment before crossing the room to give me an awkward hug. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I spread the documents across the conference table in carefully organized piles. Marriage certificates, divorce records, bank statements, email printouts, photographs, and sworn affidavits from multiple sources. It looked like evidence for a major criminal trial, which in some ways it was. This is a lot, Marcus said, staring at the documentation. It's 18 months' worth of systematic deception. Vanessa has been lying to you about every fundamental aspect of her identity and her intentions. I started with the marriage records, showing him the official documentation of Vanessa's wedding to Thomas Chen in Seattle 3 years ago, followed by the complete absence of any divorce proceedings in Washington state court records. Marcus studied the documents with the careful attention he'd learned in law school, cross-referencing dates and checking official seals. These look legitimate. They are legitimate. I had them verified by 3 different sources, including the Washington State Department of Records. Vanessa is still legally married to Thomas Chen. The divorce papers she showed you are sophisticated forgeries. I showed him the fake divorce decree Lily had photographed, pointing out the inconsistencies in formatting and the forged court seals that wouldn't pass scrutiny from anyone familiar with legal documents. If these papers are fake, then she's been planning to commit bigamy from the beginning, Marcus said quietly. That's exactly what she's been planning. And that's not the worst of it. I moved to the next pile of evidence, the fake letters Vanessa had written in my name. I'd printed out screenshots of the original drafts from her laptop, complete with metadata showing when they were created and revised. Marcus read through the letters with growing horror. Each one was a masterpiece of manipulation, designed to make me look unstable and vindictive while sabotaging his most important relationships. The letter to his constitutional law professor was particularly damaging, falsely accusing him of academic dishonesty in language that was designed to sound like it came from a concerned but unbalanced mother. She wrote these herself. His voice was barely above a whisper. All of them. Lily found the drafts on Vanessa's laptop, along with detailed research files about everyone in your life. She's been studying you like a specimen, Marcus, learning your weaknesses so she could exploit them more effectively. I showed him the psychological profiles Vanessa had created, documenting his emotional triggers and mapping out strategies for isolating him from his support system. It was like reading a military intelligence report about psychological warfare. Why would she do this? Because you're not her first victim and you're not going to be her last. I pulled out the photographs from the Denver Business Journal, showing Vanessa with David Rodriguez weeks before her engagement to Marcus. The images were clearly romantic, showing a level of intimacy that couldn't be explained away as business networking. She's been having an affair. Multiple affairs. She's already lined up her next target and has been planning to leave you after the wedding. She's been telling David that you're not sophisticated enough for her long-term goals. I played the audio recordings Lily had made of Vanessa's phone conversations, her voice cold and calculating as she discussed Marcus like he was a business transaction rather than a human being she claimed to love. Marcus sat in silence for a long time after I'd finished presenting the evidence. He stared at the documents spread across the table, occasionally picking up a piece of paper to reread something that particularly shocked him. "How long have you known about this?" he finally asked. "I started suspecting something was wrong when you stopped talking to me, but I didn't understand the scope of what was happening until Lily contacted me 3 weeks ago. She's been watching Vanessa manipulate you for months, and she couldn't stand to see you get hurt. Lily called you. She's a brave kid who loves you enough to risk her mother's anger to protect you. She's the one who provided most of this evidence. I can't believe I fell for all of this. I'm supposed to be able to see through lies and manipulation. You fell for it because you're a good person who assumes other people are telling the truth. Vanessa is a professional predator who has been perfecting these tactics for years. This isn't a failure on your part, it's a crime that was committed against you." Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Vanessa's number. Then he deleted it without calling. "The wedding is in 2 days. There are guests coming from out of state, deposits that can't be refunded, vendor contracts that have already been signed. All of that can be dealt with. What matters is that you don't legally bind yourself to someone who's been systematically destroying your life. What about Lily? If I confront Vanessa about this, what happens to her? Her father has been trying to get custody for 2 years. With this evidence of Vanessa's criminal behavior, he'll finally have grounds to remove Lily from a dangerous situation." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the Colorado mountains in the distance. "I keep thinking about all the times she convinced me that you were the problem. All the conversations where she'd comfort me after I'd ignored your calls or dismissed your attempts to rebuild our relationship. She was creating the very pain she was pretending to help me heal from. The important thing is that you can see the truth now. We can fix what she broke between us. Can we? I've said some terrible things to you. I've believed horrible lies about the woman who sacrificed everything to raise me. How do I come back from that?" I crossed the room and put my hand on his shoulder. "You come back by remembering that love is stronger than manipulation. You come back by choosing to trust the truth instead of the lies. You come back by forgiving yourself for being human enough to fall for someone who made lying an art form." Marcus turned and hugged me, then really hugged me, for the first time in 18 months. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I doubted you, sorry I believed her lies, sorry I let her turn me against the person who loves me most in the world. You don't have to apologize for being victimized by someone whose job it was to fool you. But we need to figure out how to handle the next 2 days." We spent the rest of the afternoon planning Marcus's escape from Vanessa's web. He would return to Denver and act normally until the wedding morning, then confront her with the evidence in front of the assembled guests. It would be public enough that she couldn't spin the story later, and it would serve as a warning to David Rodriguez and any other potential victims who might be present. Lily had agreed to attend the wedding with her phone recording everything, providing real-time documentation of Vanessa's reaction when her crimes were exposed. She'd also arranged for her father to be nearby with a lawyer, ready to take immediate custody if Vanessa tried to flee with her. The plan was risky and would certainly be humiliating for Marcus, but it was the only way to ensure that Vanessa faced consequences for what she'd done and couldn't simply disappear to victimize someone else. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" I asked. "We could confront her privately and call off the wedding without embarrassing you in front of all your friends and colleagues." "No, if I do this privately, she'll find a way to spin it. She'll tell people I had a breakdown or that you manipulated me into leaving her. The only way to protect myself and future victims is to expose her completely, with witnesses and evidence that can't be disputed." 2 days later, I sat in the back row of the chapel where my son was supposed to marry a woman who had spent 18 months systematically destroying his life. The guests were an odd mix of Marcus's law school friends, Vanessa's mysterious work colleagues, and family members who looked confused about why they were there. David Rodriguez sat in the third row, checking his phone and looking like a man who was waiting for a business deal to close rather than attending a romantic celebration. Several other men I didn't recognize were scattered throughout the audience, and I wondered how many of them were potential future targets Vanessa was cultivating. When the music started and Vanessa walked down the aisle in her elaborate white dress, she looked every inch the beautiful bride. But knowing what I knew about her made the performance nauseating. She was walking toward a man she'd been systematically destroying, smiling like she was the happiest woman in the world, while planning to abandon him after she'd extracted everything of value from their relationship. Marcus stood at the altar looking pale but determined. When Vanessa reached him and took his hands, he smiled at her with what looked like genuine affection. For a moment I wondered if he'd changed his mind, if the evidence had been too overwhelming to accept, and he'd decided to go through with the wedding anyway. Then the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, and Marcus stepped forward. "I do," he said clearly. "I object to this marriage on the grounds that the bride is already married to someone else and is therefore unable to legally enter into another marriage contract." The chapel erupted in gasps and confused murmuring. Vanessa's face went white, then red, then white again as she processed what was happening. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" She grabbed his arm, her voice taking on the manipulative sweetness she used when she wanted to control his reactions. "Are you having some kind of anxiety attack? Maybe we should postpone this until you're feeling better." "I'm feeling perfectly clear," Marcus replied. He pulled out a folder containing copies of all the evidence and handed it to the officiant. "These are legal documents proving that Vanessa Blackwell is currently married to Thomas Chen of Seattle, Washington. Any marriage performed today would constitute bigamy, which is a felony in the state of Colorado." Vanessa tried to grab the folder, but Marcus held it out of her reach. "Those documents are fake. Marcus, your mother has been stalking me, trying to sabotage our relationship. She's been forging legal papers to try to break us up." "Actually," said a voice from the audience, "I think we need to talk about who's been forging documents." Lily stood up from her seat in the middle of the chapel, holding her phone high so everyone could see she was recording. "Mom, should I play the recording of you talking to David about how you're planning to divorce Marcus after you've taken everything he has? Or should I start with the audio of you dictating those fake letters you wrote pretending to be Mrs. Morrison?" The look of pure hatred that crossed Vanessa's face when she saw her daughter was terrifying. "Lily, sit down right now and stop making up stories." "They're not stories, Mom. I have proof of everything. The fake divorce papers, the stolen identity information, the affairs with David and Kevin, all of it." David Rodriguez stood up abruptly, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "What the hell is going on here? Vanessa, you told me you were single." "I am single. These people are all lying. They're trying to destroy my life." But the evidence was overwhelming and the witnesses were too numerous to intimidate. As Marcus read through the documentation for the assembled guests, Vanessa's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. She screamed accusations at me, at Lily, at Marcus, claiming we were all part of some elaborate conspiracy to ruin her happiness. When she realized that no one was believing her lies anymore, she grabbed her phone and tried to call someone, presumably for help or advice. But Lily had already contacted the police, and 2 officers were walking through the chapel doors just as Vanessa was trying to make her escape. "Vanessa Blackwell," one of the officers said, "you're under arrest for bigamy, identity theft, fraud, and stalking. You have the right to remain silent." As they handcuffed her and read her rights, Vanessa looked at Marcus with genuine emotion for the first time since I'd known about her. But it wasn't love or regret, it was pure calculating fury that her carefully laid plans had been exposed. "You'll regret this," she told him as they led her away. "All of you will regret this," but the only regret in that chapel belonged to the people who'd been fooled by her manipulation. Marcus regretted the months he'd lost with me. David regretted being drawn into her web of lies. The other potential victims in the audience regretted how close they'd come to becoming her next targets. And I regretted that it had taken so long to save my son from someone who had never deserved his love. After the police left and the confused guests dispersed, Marcus and I sat together in the empty chapel with Lily between us. The three of us had survived Vanessa's attempt to destroy our family, and we'd done it by choosing truth over manipulation, evidence over lies, and love over fear. "What happens now?" Lily asked. "Now your father gets custody, and you get to have a normal life," I told her, "and Marcus and I work on rebuilding what we almost lost." "And Vanessa faces the consequences of her choices," Marcus said, "which is something she should have done a long time ago." 6 months later, Vanessa was convicted on multiple felony charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Her previous victims came forward during the trial, creating a pattern of behavior that ensured she would serve her full sentence without the possibility of early parole. Lily moved in with her father in Seattle and started therapy to process the trauma of living with someone who had used manipulation and emotional abuse as parenting tools. She video calls Marcus and me every Sunday, and we're planning a trip to visit her this summer. Marcus moved back to Phoenix after the trial concluded, taking a job with a firm that specializes in family law and victim advocacy. He says he wants to use his experience to help other people who've been manipulated and abused by people they trusted. And I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it hurts, even when it destroys everything they thought they knew about their life. Love isn't about protecting people from difficult realities, it's about standing with them while they face those realities and helping them build something better on the other side. Marcus and I are closer now than we've ever been, bonded by the shared experience of surviving someone who tried to destroy us both. We talk every day, and he comes over for dinner twice a week, helping me plant a new garden where we grow vegetables we'll can together when harvest season comes. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that bring you back to where you started, but stronger and wiser for having fought the battle. The hardest part wasn't the public humiliation or the legal proceedings that followed. It wasn't even the realization that I'd been living a lie for 18 months, manipulated by someone who had turned deception into an art form. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment again, to believe that I could recognize genuine emotion after being fooled so completely by someone whose entire relationship with me had been performance. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, I found myself in Dr. Sarah Chen's office, a therapist who specialized in helping victims of psychological manipulation rebuild their sense of reality. The irony of her last name wasn't lost on me, though she assured me she was no relation to Vanessa's legal husband in Seattle. "Trauma isn't just about what happens to us," Dr. Chen explained during one of our early sessions. "It's about what we tell ourselves about what happened to us." Vanessa didn't just lie to you about external facts. She convinced you to doubt your own perceptions, your own memories, your own capacity to distinguish truth from fiction. I'd started therapy reluctantly, pushed by my mother who worried that I was withdrawing from life in the aftermath of Vanessa's arrest. She was right to worry. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job, claiming I needed time to deal with family issues, but really I just couldn't face the daily interactions with colleagues who knew what had happened. The story had made local news when Vanessa was arrested, complete with photos from our interrupted wedding and quotes from other victims who came forward during her trial. The shame was overwhelming. How could someone with a law degree, someone trained to evaluate evidence and detect deception, fall so completely for someone who had been lying about everything? How could I have believed that my own mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me, was capable of the psychological cruelty Vanessa had attributed to her? Smart people often make the best victims, Dr. Chen told me. You're trained to look for logical inconsistencies in legal arguments, not emotional manipulation in personal relationships. Vanessa exploited the very qualities that make you good at your job: your willingness to trust, your desire to see the best in people, your commitment to working through problems rather than abandoning them. The therapy sessions were brutal but necessary. We worked through every major incident in my relationship with Vanessa, identifying the manipulation tactics she'd used and the psychological vulnerabilities she'd exploited. I learned about love bombing, gaslighting, triangulation, and isolation techniques. I discovered that what I'd interpreted as passionate love had actually been a calculated campaign to remake my personality and destroy my existing relationships. The fake letters were just the beginning. Vanessa had been intercepting my phone calls and text messages from my mother, responding to some of them herself and deleting others entirely. She'd been monitoring my email and social media accounts, curating what information I received from the outside world. She'd even been drugging my coffee occasionally with mild sedatives that made me feel confused and emotionally unstable, then suggesting that I was having anxiety attacks that proved I needed her support. The goal was never to make you happy, Dr. Chen explained. The goal was to make you dependent. Happy people don't stay in relationships that require them to abandon everyone they love, but confused, isolated, emotionally destabilized people do. Learning about Vanessa's tactics helped me understand how I'd been victimized, but it didn't immediately restore my ability to trust other people. For months after her arrest, I found myself analyzing every interaction with friends and colleagues, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. I couldn't accept compliments without wondering what the person wanted from me. I couldn't share personal information without worrying that it would be used against me later. The paranoia was exhausting, but Dr. Chen assured me it was a normal part of recovery. Your brain is trying to protect you from being fooled again, she said. The hypervigilance will fade as you rebuild confidence in your ability to recognize genuine versus manufactured emotions. My relationship with my mother was another complicated piece of the healing process. Intellectually, I knew that she'd never done any of the things Vanessa had accused her of. I'd seen the evidence of Vanessa's deception, heard the recordings of her planning to destroy my family relationships. But emotionally, I still carried the residue of 18 months' worth of negative conditioning about my mother's motives and mental state. My mother was patient with my recovery in ways that made me ashamed of how easily I'd believed the worst about her. When I flinched away from her attempts to hug me, she didn't take it personally. When I questioned her suggestions about my career or my living situation, she answered my concerns without defensiveness. When I had panic attacks about trusting the wrong person again, she sat with me until they passed without trying to fix or minimize my fear. I know you need time to remember who I really am, she told me during one of our awkward coffee meetings. Vanessa spent 1.5 years convincing you that I was someone else. I can spend however long it takes convincing you that what we had before was real. The breakthrough came 6 months into therapy, during a session where Dr. Chen asked me to describe my earliest memory of feeling loved. I found myself talking about a time when I was 8 years old and had gotten into a fight at school defending another kid from bullies. Instead of punishing me for fighting, my mother had taken me out for ice cream and told me she was proud of me for standing up for someone who couldn't defend himself. She taught me that love means protecting people who are vulnerable, I realized as I told the story. That's exactly what she was trying to do when she exposed Vanessa. She was protecting me from someone who was hurting me, even though it meant risking our relationship. That memory became an anchor point for rebuilding trust in my mother's love. Every time I felt suspicious of her motives, I reminded myself of the 8-year-old boy she'd celebrated for doing the right thing even when it was difficult. The woman who had raised me to protect vulnerable people was the same woman who had risked everything to save me from someone who was destroying my life. Lily became another unexpected source of healing. Her weekly video calls gave me a window into normal family dynamics that helped me remember what healthy relationships looked like. She talked about her father's new girlfriend with the normal teenage skepticism that had nothing to do with manipulation or control. She complained about homework and friend drama with the casual assumption that the adults in her life would listen and support her without using her vulnerabilities against her. You know what's weird, she said during one of our calls. I used to think all families were like ours, with all the secrets and lies and walking on eggshells. But living with my dad now, I realize that most people just say what they mean and mean what they say. It's so much less exhausting. Her observation hit me like a revelation. I'd gotten so used to analyzing subtext and hidden meanings in every conversation with Vanessa that I'd forgotten what it felt like to take people at face value. The constant vigilance required to navigate her manipulation had become my default mode of communication, making every relationship feel like a potential battlefield. Learning to relax that hypervigilance was like learning to breathe normally again, after holding my breath for 18 months. Dr. Chen taught me meditation techniques and grounding exercises that helped me stay present in conversations instead of constantly scanning for threats. She helped me develop new criteria for evaluating relationships based on consistency, respect, and mutual support, rather than intensity and drama. Healthy love is actually quite boring compared to manipulative love, she told me. It doesn't come with constant highs and lows, dramatic declarations, or urgent crises that require immediate attention. Healthy love is steady, predictable, and leaves you feeling more like yourself rather than less. The contrast was striking when I started dating again a year after Vanessa's conviction. Sarah, a colleague from my new job at the victim advocacy firm, approached relationships with a directness that initially made me nervous. She said what she meant what she said, and expected the same from me. There were no hidden agendas, no tests to pass, no elaborate emotional performances designed to prove my devotion. When I told her about my past experience with Vanessa, she listened without trying to fix me or minimize my concerns. When I had moments of doubt about her intentions, she addressed them directly instead of making me feel crazy for asking questions. When conflicts arose between us, we resolved them through honest conversation rather than emotional manipulation. "You know what I like most about you," she told me 6 months into our relationship. "You never try to be anyone other than exactly who you are." After spending so much time with people who perform their emotions instead of feeling them, your authenticity is refreshing. Her words made me realize how much I'd changed during my relationship with Vanessa. I'd become someone who performed love rather than felt it, who said what I thought she wanted to hear rather than what I actually believed. Recovery wasn't just about identifying manipulation tactics, it was about rediscovering the person I'd been before I'd learned to doubt everything I thought and felt. 2 years after the interrupted wedding, I returned to the chapel where it all happened to meet with other survivors of psychological manipulation. The victim advocacy organization I worked for had started a support group for people who'd been targeted by romantic predators, and our first meeting was intentionally held in a place that represented transformation rather than trauma. Standing in that same space where Vanessa had been arrested, surrounded by other people who understood the specific shame and confusion of being fooled by someone they'd loved, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the certainty that I could trust my own judgment again. We shared our stories without fear of being blamed for our victimization. We talked about red flags we'd missed and warning signs we'd now recognize. We celebrated small victories like setting boundaries with family members or ending friendships that felt one-sided. We grieved the time we'd lost, and the relationships that had been damaged by people who had weaponized our capacity for love. But mostly, we reminded each other that surviving sophisticated manipulation wasn't a sign of weakness, it was proof of strength. We'd all loved deeply enough to be vulnerable to someone who exploited that vulnerability. We'd all trusted completely enough to be betrayed by someone who made betrayal an art form. And we'd all found the courage to choose truth over comfort when the choice became unavoidable. The chapel that had once represented the worst day of my life became a symbol of the community that had emerged from that shared experience. We were no longer isolated victims carrying shame about our poor judgment. We were survivors who had learned to recognize authentic love by surviving its most convincing counterfeit. And that knowledge, hard-won and painful though it was, made us stronger than we'd ever been before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.